So, good afternoon, everybody. So, thank you for coming here. For people who didn't come in the morning, this is the second symposium with Hearst University. The first symposium was in 2020. It was a virtual one about macroeconomics. And 2021, I think so. And in May of this year, I went to Wuhan to visit Hearst University with a delegation of UFMG. And after this, we started a more intense cooperation that we are intending to start more intensively now. We did 6 workshops, virtual workshops in several different themes. And now the delegation is here, part of people who were in the workshops. And we are discussing environmental, health economics, and demographics. The economics faculty in Hearst University has lots of similarities with our graduate and undergraduate program. So I'm sure that we have lots of synergies and things that we can share together to apply for research proposals and conduct research projects that will be very interesting for both countries. So thank you. I would like to thank you, especially Professor Campolina that is here with us. Professor Clélio Campolina was the president of this university when the Hearst UFMG, the first agreement was signed and the Confucius Institute come to UFMG. So thank you, Professor Campolina. This is an honor to have you here with us. So in this afternoon, we have 2 panels. One panel about environmental economics, and the other panel about demographics. So I would like to invite Professor Aline Magalhães de Souza, who will moderate this panel. And I also would like to thank Professor Edson and Professor Aline that were together with us in these 2 days, taking care of Professor Banban. So thank you so much for joining us in this project of this cooperation. Thank you. So Professor Aline, this is your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Monica. Thank you for the possibility of this kind of project, such important project. And it's a pleasure to have you all here. And let's start the next presentation. Firstly, I would like to introduce Professor Banban. Professor Banban is Associate Professor of School of Economics at Hearst University. Her research lines, her main research lines include climate and environment issues, environmental policies such as carbon markets, carbon price, and green innovation, energy projects also, and the papers have been published on top journals, top important journals such as energy policy, climate policy, and so on. So thank you so much, Professor Banban. It's a pleasure to have you here. We have about 35 minutes for presentation, and after that, I will open for the audience for questions, comments. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Aline. And if I use too much time, please just remind me. And today my topic is price stabilization mechanisms in China's emissions trading schemes. And in case that there might be too many new words in this title. So in the first slide, I just want to show you that what is an emissions trading system, or called emissions trading scheme. So an emissions trading scheme, the ETS, is a market-oriented policy tool to regulating emissions. For example, the carbon emissions, the greenhouse gases emissions, and it could also be like sulfur dioxide, something like that. And the government will set a cap, usually the absolute target of an emission, for all the covered entities. And then the allowances, which summing up equaling the cap, are issued and distributed by the government to the covered entities. And the covered entities are allowed to trade the allowances in the secondary market if they have, extra or in short of the allowances. And at the end of a compliance period, the covered entities are required to submit sufficient allowances whose size is equal to their emissions. Otherwise, they will be fined. And because there is a cap and also trade, and sometimes this kind of system are called a cap and trade system. And usually, and in sometimes we also call it carbon market, just for short, if they are regulating the carbon emissions. So here is a map of ETS worldwide. And you can see that China now has a national ETS starting since 2021. And before that, we also have 8 regional pilots starting since 2013 and 2014. And which makes China now the biggest carbon market in terms of covered emissions. And before that, the EU ETS was the world's largest one and covering multiple sectors. And the US do not have the national-wide ETS, but it has regional ones such as the RGGI and also the WRI. And here, the Brazil, in this map, it shows that there is a carbon market under consideration. And before I arrived, I read a news that says that Brazil introduced draft laws for a cap and trade system. I think it's news in September or in October, just very recently. And it says there's a new legislation proposed for the establishment of a Brazilian greenhouse gases emissions trading system. And from this news, we can know some basic knowledge. For example, the coverage would be the entities emitting more than 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. But other key parameters of this system are to be determined. For example, the cap and its tragedies, and also the allocation methods, the percent of carbon credits allowed for compliance, and also the market stability provision, which is the aim of our talk today, and also the provision to protect against the reversal and leakage. So from this background information, you can see that an emissions trading scheme, the ETS, is actually a man-made market, and whose supply is quite inflexible, because the supply is just the cap of the market. So it's like a vertical line, very inflexible. And when there is shocks, any shocks on the demand, and it will turn into a large fluctuation of the carbon prices. That might be in that case. And also, because it is a man-made market, the design of key policy elements is crucial for the effectiveness of this market, and in which the price stabilization mechanism or the market stability provision, you call it in the news, is essential to prevent the large fluctuation of the price. So let me start the first part of this talk, and I will show you some theoretical solutions of the price management or the PSMs and the practices in China. So why we need a price management or the price stabilization mechanism? So I think to answer this question, we should first ask a question that how to choose between a carbon market and a carbon tax. So this is a huge question, but actually the answer was quite old in Weizmann's 1974 paper, and he compared the prices versus quantities, the different prices are carbon tax and quantities are ETS, under cost uncertainties. And he found that if there is cost uncertainties, the comparative advantage of these two policies are depending on the relative slopes of the marginal abatement cost, the MC curve, and the marginal benefits curve, the MB curve. And then a tax will win if the slope of a marginal cost curve is flatter than that of a marginal benefits curve. And unfortunately, this is true in the case of greenhouse gases, which was found by the Pizer 2002 on the JPUB paper. So the cap and trade, although it's common, but it's actually a second best policy to control the greenhouse gas emissions under cost uncertainties, while the carbon tax actually, in theory, is the first best. But an ETS is politically more appealing because, no tax, right? So politically more appealing, and you can find it more worldwide than a carbon tax. So if we have a carbon market, the ETS, because of politically appealing reasons, and then you want to tackle the problem of the uncertainty, how to do that? Then Roberts and Spencer suggest that we could have a hybrid system to introduce some kind of price management to allow the supply to be a little bit flexible, to offset the demand shocks, to introducing something like a price floor or price ceilings or something like that. So we called this kind of mechanism in the practice the price stabilization mechanism, or some similar names, or short for the PSM in this talk. So why we need this? The first one is to reduce the uncertainty, the impact of uncertainty. And another thing is that in the practice, sometimes the price could be very low, for example, because of demand shocks, because of the over allocation. But if you want to stimulate the low carbon investment, to stimulate the clean innovation, which is very important for low carbon transition in the economy, and you need actually relatively high and stable carbon prices. So in the practice, the benefits of the PSM, a very important goal is to maintain the carbon price at a certain level, thereby stimulating the low carbon investment and the innovation. And in theory, there are the scholars proposed several types of the PSM. So the first one, we called it a price-based PSM. So this is kind of like price floors, price ceilings, and if you have them both, we call it a price corridor, and it could change, like increasing all the time. And so this method is kind of to change the vertical supply curve into a ladder, so introducing the flexibility. And you can even have like soft ceilings to allow the prices go up. And then the second type is a quantity-based PSM. So the quantity-based means that if the market would have a very high prices, it indicates that the supply may not be enough, and the government could auction some allowances into the market. And if the price would be very low, and the market could use some money and to buy back from the market. So this method will indirectly affect the price trends by providing flexibility in the allowance supply. And in theory, there are some models to show that allowing updating cap between periods and according to the realized socioeconomic parameters would benefit the system. And in the practice, the EU ETS introduced a market stability reserve called the MSR since its fourth phase, because in the previous phase, they find that they do not have this mechanism and the price would go very low, and they introduce some such kind of quantity-based PSM. And another design that a little bit relevant to the quantity-based PSM is that whether this system allow the allowances to bank to the future or borrowing from the future. We call it banking or borrowing between the compliance period. And this will help in evening out uncertainties throughout time. And the third type of PSM, we called it an intensity-based PSM. So the intensity-based means that you can set intensity cap rather than absolute cap. For example, you set the target as the emissions per GDP or the emissions per output, or that you can use the intensive-based allocation. You allocate the prices according to the the performance of the sector. So it's like a performance standard of the emissions per GDP or emissions per output. So the benefits of it is that it can introduce uncertainties of economic activities into the ETS target. And this will very helpful for the developing economies, because the developing economies may also face large uncertainty in its economic activities, the economic growth rate, compared to the developed economies. And another thing that I should mention, that we should distinguish this kind of PSMs from the trading risk management measures. So the PSM actually addressed the inflexibility in supply, who cannot match the exogenous shocks in demand. But by contrast, the daily trading risk mechanisms address the risk of short-term market price volatility. For example, the circuit breakers, the margin requirements, the position limits, etc. So the latter won't affect the supply. Then these are the three types of PSM that proposed by theoretical literatures. And how would they be in the practice? And in China, we had 7 or 8 regional pilots. And these pilots are actually independent carbon markets, have similar but slightly different designs. And these pilots have all designed some kind of PSMs. So there are 7 official pilots considered and designed in the 2012 to 2013, and started trading in 2013 to 2014. And also a voluntary pilot started trading in 2017. So these 7 pilots, including 5 cities, the Beijing, the capital city, Shanghai and Tianjin, Chongqing and Shenzhen, and also 2 provinces, the Guangdong and the Hubei province, where our university located in the Wuhan. And also a voluntary pilot, Fujian province here, neighborhood to Guangdong. And then after that, a national carbon market launched in 2021, July, and covering only power generation at this stage. But the pilot market covered multiple sectors. So actually, these pilots are all adopt some measures of different kind of PSMs. For example, the first type, the price-based PSMs, and we read all the documents, the policy documents of these pilots, and to find out how does they design it, and we even rate it to show that whether the design is, very close to the theory proposed. And then for the price-based PSM, the Beijing and Hubei are the best because they set reasonable price corridors and follow clear rules in open market operation, which means that they have a trigger price, and the price would be lower than some floor price, and the government would buy back, and the price would be very high, and the government would, auction or fill some allowances to the market. And then we rated lower rates to other pilots because that their design are not that complete. For example, they do not have the trigger price, or they do not have very clear rule of open market operation. And then the second type of PSM, the quantity-based, nearly all the pilots have something like that, but they use very different approach as the EU. So the EU ETS set and cap like in 3 or 5 years. So this is like the cap projections, and the set cap 3 or 5 years in advance. But for China's pilots, several pilots set the cap before 2015 for a 3-year cap, and then they find that, wow, there is no flexibility because the economic conditions are fluctuate, or they have many uncertainties, unexpected conditions. And then nearly all the pilots shift to an annual basis determination of the cap. So they calculate the cap every year according to the economic conditions, according to the realized emissions of the previous year. So this is kind of a similar thing that the MSR do, to introduce the flexibility, a kind of updating cap by this means. And then the intensity-based PSM, and we found that although the pilots use the cap and trade mechanism, so they set absolute cap, but they have intensity-based allocation, and in many sectors. So we rate high scores, for example, S4 for the pilots who have the intensity-based allocation in many sectors, and then lower scores if they have intensity-based allocation in just very few sectors. So this is like the background information in the theory and how does this mechanism practices in China's pilots. And then in the second part, we actually show an empirical work, a small empirical work, that try to evaluate that how does this price stabilization mechanism would spur the green innovation in ETS firms. And we use the evidence of China's pilot market. So why we do this? Because we find that actually the Chinese pilots provide a unique case for identifying the effects of the PSM. Although there are a lot of theoretical paper that design and also simulate the effectiveness of different kind of PSM, but we find that there are few studies on the performance of the PSM using the empirical approach. And then a possible reason is that PSM usually lack variation within one single ETS, and this will challenging the specification. And for China's carbon market pilots, they provide unique case for evaluating this because first, they are independent markets with different policy design. And second, all the pilots choose different settings of PSMs, and many of them made adjustment between the periods. So there is variation among the region and among the time. And then this mechanism also covers the most important institutional design that influences permit supply, such as capping rules, the allocation, and price management. And also, they are all within the mainland China. So all the firms that in our observation are facing the common business environment. And aside from this point, and another very important point is that the remainder designs shared more similarities among the pilots. The remainder, the other designs other than the PSMs. For example, the MRV methodology, which means how to monitor, reporting, or verifying the emissions of the firms. So they are recommended at the national level, so very similar. And the other trading rules, the offset rules, the penalty rates, and they are all quite similar among the pilots. So the main differences in the policy design are the PSMs. And another difference is that the coverage sectors and the threshold, they are a little bit different. But this slight difference, we could address this problem in our empirical design. For example, we use the DDD approach, the difference in difference and differences approach, and which cover one dimension as the sector, and we can control to the heterogeneity effect in the sector. And also we were introducing firm and industry fixed effect to control for some, firm and industry level heterogeneity. And what we do is that we focus on the impacts of the PSM on ETS covered firm green innovation, so which is one of the essential concern of this policy element. And we contribute as an empirical evaluation of the PSM, which are rare as mentioned in the current literature. And we also contribute to the literature supporting the ETS-induced green innovation in EU and in China, because some of them have paid attention to some policy details, such as the allowances allocation, but no study about the PSMs. So our identification strategy is a DDD approach. The DDD, they have 3 dimensions. So one dimension is the pilot region versus the non-pilot region. And the second dimension is the ETS covered and uncovered sectors. And then the fourth are the time, the pre and post policy. And they are a kind of staggered DDD because the pilots started trading in different years. And in the first step, actually, we run a very basic regression to test whether the ETS have the effects on the green innovation. So the sector J is equals to 1 if the sector belongs to an ETS sector. And then the ETS PT equals to 1 if a region P is an ETS region, and after the trading, it would be equal to 1, otherwise 0. And second, in order to test the effectiveness of the pilot with a specific PSM, we kind of decompose the ETS dummy into 2 dummies, the PSM no dummy and PSM yes dummy. So if an ETS is with a specific type of PSM, then the PSM yes equals to 1. Otherwise, the PSM no equals to 1. So the beta 2 actually is the parameter that we are caring about. So the data, we use the listed company data in China from 2009 to 2019. The ETS sectors include petrochemicals, chemicals, building materials, such as cement, the steel, non-ferrometals, paper, power and heat, and aviation in some region. And the green innovation, we use the low carbon patent application data, but we use the proportion. So what is the proportion of the green patents out of the total patents of the firm? And the data from China's stated intellectual patent office, the SIPO. And we define the low carbon patents according to the World Intellectual Patent Office, the WIPO. And we control the green and non-green patent stock to control the effect of the path dependency. And we also have some firm-level controls and the city-level control showing the environmental regulation measured by the keywords from the policy documents. Then a quick review of our result. So first, as prerequisite, overall, the ETS pilot in China could increase the proportion of green invention of firms, showing by the first and second column. And the only difference is that the error, standard error are clustered at the different levels, one at sector level and one at firm level. And then I think the most important results are starting from the third column, is that the pilot with a certain PSM are more helpful in inducing firms' green innovation. For example, pilots with price-based ones, the PSM yes parameter are positively, significantly positive, and the same with the quantity-based and intensity-based PSM. And then we also introducing our rating into the regression, and we find that only pilots adopting the highest rating design of these PSMs could induce significantly positive green invention of covered firms. And we do some robustness check, and I think I can skip this one. Then we also have a two set of regressions to test the channel. So the first previous regression showing that the PSM are helpful in inducing the green innovation, but then whether they are through, lifting the carbon prices. So we add a supplementary regression to test the above channel, but the carbon price data are only in the regional level. So we only have like 8 regions who have the carbon price data. So then we use the monthly data in the first step to expand the observation. And we also use a time series decomposition to get the carbon price trends in the pilot, because trends are more important than the other, volatility. So then first we find that both price-based and quantity-based PSMs increase carbon prices and their long-term trend here in the fourth and fifth column, and even larger effect on lifting the carbon price trends than the carbon price level. And then second, and the intensity-based PSM show insignificant effect. So they only covered limited sectors, so we guess possibly that they have smaller effect on the prices. and its positive effect on green innovation made through other channels rather than lifting the carbon price. And then if you have, price increasing, and we find that significant positive effect of carbon price and its trend on firms' green innovation application proportions. And also, we divided the carbon price in different intervals, the low and medium and the high intervals, and only the carbon prices at the highest interval will have a positive effect on inducing the green innovation. So it means that the carbon price above a certain level is very crucial. Okay, so quick wrap up. The conclusion is that we found the induced green innovation effect of ETS adopting PSMs, and especially with a high standard for setting. And the price and the quantity-based PSMs promote green innovation mainly by maintaining the carbon price trend above a certain level. And although this is based on the China's case, we think that our results have general policy implications. For example, first, it is essential to introduce PSM in an ETS design. And the second is that the price-based and quantity-based ones could be more effective in lifting the carbon price and promoting the green innovation. And then for the price-based, for example, the price limits, it is necessary to set up specific price corridors and standardized open market operation procedures. And for quantity-based measures, providing flexibility to update the cap according to realized socioeconomic conditions could also be effective. And this presentation is actually based on 2 papers, and the first one is already published in 2020 on the climate policy. So it's like a theoretical and practical background. You can find it in the first paper. And the empirical part is a working paper that under review. And thank you very much.
Professor Banban, thank you so much for the excellent exposition. This topic in particular for Brazil is super in line with what has been discussed. As you know, Brazil is expected to implement a carbon market, a cap and trade system, especially in coming years. And although some of important aspects such as coverage, cap, price management, price ceiling, and transactions, compliance, and also penalties that you show here are not yet specified or clearly specified. So based on Chinese experience, what are the main concerns or maybe lessons of implementing such carbon markets, such cap and trade systems, and that you see? And another question that I would like to address is related to the effectiveness of carbon markets. And in recent years, I think a series of controversies and also corruption scandals involving regarding the carbon markets around the world have been raised. In literature, for instance, the results, that the effectiveness is also ambiguous. And again, based on Chinese experience, how do you see that? The results of existing carbon markets, because exactly 2015 report found that an estimated of 80% of projects under Kyoto Protocol, Kyoto Trade System, cap and CDM, were of a low environment quality. And actually, the system had increased emissions instead of decreased emissions. So tell us about a little bit about that, please. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for these very good questions, because we encounter these questions when China develops its pilots carbon market and also the national carbon market. So I think your first question is that what is the biggest challenges in designing a carbon market? And I think we should add a condition that for a developing economy, such as in China and in Brazil. And here I write a slide of the intensity-based PSM, but this thing actually are very important for developing economies. For example, for the China, when we design our pilots ETS during 2011, and we started to have to review the statistics, the historic data of the emissions, both at the firm level and at the the provincial level, the macro level. And at that time, the economic growth rate in China would be as high as like 10%, like in 2005. We have more than 10% increasing rate. And if we design a carbon market cap and allowances allocation depending on historic data, for example, to 2005, 2006, it would be extremely high in the projection of the economic growth rate. But then when the carbon market started trading in 2014, for example, for Hubei, and the economic growth rate may be 8 or 7%, and nowadays maybe 5%. So if you rely on the historic data to do all the projections, and there might be problems. The problems may cause over-allocation, but maybe sometimes you might be, estimate the emissions too low. You also have these possibilities. So, so what China's ETS do, actually, they introducing two things. The first one is that they're introducing some kind of intensity-based things, may not only at the cap level, but also at the allocation level. So the intensity-based things is that you can link the emissions with the output. For example, for the firm level allocation, you link its, allowances assigned to these firms and then linked to its output or to its economic activity indicators. And at the macro level, you can link your absolute target to an intensity target. And then, your like GDP or the economic activity, the output, these indicators, you can allow it to update according to the realized conditions. And this will largely reduce the uncertainties caused by the economic activities. So I think this is very, very important for an ETS in and developing economies. And also you can have like, other sources, other kind of settings, the quantity-based, the price-based, the price management, and this would all be helpful. So your second question, I think that how the effectiveness, right? Effectiveness, yes. I have read literatures that said that ETS may not have effective and may have increasing the emissions. But you should know that actually the ETS, the most important function of a carbon market or emissions trading system is to achieve the emission target by the cap by the lowest social abatement cost. So this is the aim of the carbon market. So how to get abatement depending on how large cap you design. So again, that I want to show this slide that the market is a man-made market. So how this market would be effectiveness depending on how you design the things. So the most important one is the cap. So if you set a too loose cap, then no effect. So many of the reviews on the effectiveness of the carbon market, if you use data of the EU in the first stage and the second stage, that may not have effectiveness because they have too loose cap. And then the carbon price will go low to the floor to nearly zero around like 2009. So it's depending on the design. Okay. And for the literature to China's carbon market, it's very interesting. There are a lot of literature assessing the effectiveness of China's pilot market because it's something like a quasi-experiment, so you can use the idea or other technique. So there are a lot of papers, and they find effectiveness in terms of emission reductions and also green innovation, like in this paper. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I would like to open to the audiences. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Professor Banban, for this amazing presentation. Brazil is starting this new challenge nowadays, and so this is quite important for us to listen to the lessons that you have learned in China. So I thought it's a different type of question that I'd like to make to you. So first of all, it's quite interesting for me to understand how you organized the experiment, because it's and it was a doubt that I didn't understand completely. You don't have a national market, because you designed a pilot one. How and I know that the regions are completely different. I know that you have dummy variables to try to control for this, but they are completely different. So how do you think that you control for this difference in terms of this local fake markets, artificial markets, because it was supposed to be just one market. Usually it's a national one, and you did like six markets in the experiments. Okay. What do you think are this? How we can generalize these results, taking this consideration the type of experiment that you conducted in China?
So first, this is not the pilots that I designed the experiment. It's like the pilots picked by the central government, and I think in the morning.
But it was designed as a pilot experiment, or no? It was designed as a pilot experiment. No?
Yes.
Okay.
It was picked by the central government, and to say that, well, this city or this province, because these cities are actually the same level as a province in China. They're a very special type of city. So these cities and these provinces, and you play as a region of experiment.
But probably these regions are are very heterogeneous in terms of the industries, in terms of the emissions.
Yes.
How did you control for this? Because you are using different mechanisms for price stabilization in each region.
We control for, first we have a set of city level control.
Yes.
And then also a set of fixed effect. And this fixed effect including the year, the firm level, and this is the pilot year level.
Okay.
And this is the sector year level, and then the pilot sector level.
Oh, that's nice.
So a set of different fixed effects.
So all these fixed effects were enough to control for all this heterogeneity.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the city level controls the very important one is that we control for the environmental policy intensity at the city level. So I think these are control for the regional heterogeneity. And then for the design of the ETS, I don't know whether I understand your question properly, but actually we have a slide to show that these different pilots, they have different designs, but these different designs are concentrated in the PSMs, the price stabilization mechanism, such as the capping rules, the allocation rules, the price management rules. So these are exactly the effects that we want to test. Yes. And then the other set of designs, so I show that in this page, so they share similarities. We review all the documents. These are all the very important policy elements. For example, the MRV, how to monitor and reporting and verification, so how to counting these carbon emissions, and the rules are almost the same. And then the trading rules, we read all the trading rules of the pilots, and they are almost the same. The most important ones are almost the same. And then the offset, whether they could use external sources of certificated reduction like CDM, only like all pilots allow for 5% or 10%, and then this project even paused since 2017. So all pilots do not have this source of external reductions, and the penalty rates, they are limited by the maximum amount of administrative penalty rates in China by Chinese law. So the remaining design of these pilots are very similar.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know whether I understand.
No, this is quite interesting, this type of experiment that you can do. Well, it's
the same with the presentation in the early morning that Jinqi also presented, like there are some pilots in China.
Yes, it's the same.
It's the same thing.
The opportunity to implement different policies, and then you can...
Yeah.
Yes.
For China, if the national government wants to, push
yes.
new innovative policy tools, and they want to see the effectiveness first, and they will typically choose some pilots.
They conduct this type of experiment.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
This is fantastic.
Yes.
This is
so a lot of like DID, RD, all the things to do.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi, Professor Edison.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very nice, very good. Just one thing, we know this is a pilot market, so but, is China thinking to use this kind of system in the future to contribute to the national reduction emissions that the countries used to do at COP, at the United Nations conferences? Because I think it's not very big now, but I think can evolve to something that can contribute to reducing emissions. And second, when you said about this goal that's related to GDP or production, but this is not like, if this kind of mechanism, you don't reduce the emissions, you just keep the rate or the proportion. So I think could not be very good for a global target of emissions, like a national one. So these are my questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very, very important questions. And so for the first one, whether the PSMs are observed in the national scheme, right? We have some, but not enough. Not enough than the pilot market. For example, for the national market, I think they allocate the cap, per annual basis. So they have a certain, updating or flexibility to updating the supply, updating the cap, and they have, I think they allow, whether they allow banking or something like that. They have some, smaller ones, and also the national market of China is a very important, a very special type of ETS called the Tradable Performance Standard, because at this stage it only covers the power generators, and for the national carbon market it even do not have the cap. It's just to set the the intensity-based target for these power generations. The target is the emissions per output. So in this sense, they have some like quantity-based and intensity-based PSMs, but they do not have the price-based ones, which is the most important ones. And nowadays in China, there are many scholars doing researches around this, doing researches around like how to introducing a price floor in such type of TPS market. So one of my paper actually is also addressing these issues, and we trying to have more researchers to support the government decision. So I think this is the first question. And the second question is that whether the intensity-based cap would be benefit to the global emissions reduction. And I think it depends on the condition of the country. So China choose to use some kind of intensity-based target. For example, during its previous years, like what we could call the 11th five-year plan or the 12th five-year plan, we set target at the national level of emissions intensity reduction by, for example, 40%, 60%, like that, because at that stage, the economic growth rate is super high. But nowadays, we have the carbon peaking and the carbon neutrality, so it's towards the absolute control nowadays in China. So we also control for the absolute amount of emissions nowadays. And I think it depends on the feature of the economy and also depends on the feature of the sector. For example, for the power sector, it may be good to regulate the performance rather than the absolute level. So there is no right answer, I think, for this question. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Juan Paulo. I'm a professor also at this department. The presentation it was very good. I have some doubts. Maybe I lost the first part of the presentation, so maybe I apologize for it. But I have some questions related to specific things about the system stabilization that you use. And I don't know if it includes some credit markets for that carbon caps and so on, so the firms can sell and to consume more than credit, like a bank of credits for the pollution and so on. Because I think that it was something that in general it helps to reduce some uncertainty in some specific cases in which, I don't know, there is some kind of shocks or so on. So I would like to know if that's part of the stabilization thing, or just only the government buying or selling when the price is low or high, and how these things can work in a more global things when you have more sectors into this case. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just find these slides. I think you are right that if you want to stabilize the price, and the most straight way is to set the price floor and the price ceiling. But how to maintain the floor price and the ceiling price, it's depending on that. For example, at the floor price, the government have different choices. You can buy back from the market, so which means that the government should have some, a pool of money that they can use to buy the allowances from the market. And at the ceiling price, which indicated that the supply may not enough, and then the government can, fill some allowances into the market. So which means that there is a allowances reserve, as you indicated, held by the government. And usually there would be 5% or 10% set aside as a pool, as a reserve. And when the price goes too high, and the government can auction or just allocate these allowances into this market. So it typically work like that. But to maintain a floor price is much harder, because if you want to buy back from the market, it means that the government should have money. And the money, we did not know the size before the things really happened. So there are other mechanisms. For example, if you auction the allowances, and you can have a reserve price at auction, and this reserve price could play as a floor price, and some different kind of design like that. And in the practice, the carbon market in the US like to use the way directly manage the price, use the price ceiling or the price floor. You can observe it in the California's cap and trade, the REGI or some kind of that. But the EU do not like this idea, because the economics in the EU think that while this is market and the government should not intervene the market price, and they do not like that. So they choose another type, the quantity-based ones, the MSR. Just to directly auction, hold back some allowances and directly do the auctions into the market. So different approaches just because of the political reasons of different economies. At the national level, regretfully, I don't think that the national level ETS have a very good price stabilization mechanism yet. So they only have like allowing cap updating every year and some kind of intensity-based allocation, but they lack of price management or some real types of quantity-based one like the EU MSR. But for the pilot level, I think some pilots have very good price-based management, like Beijing and Hubei.
Because I think it's a good way at least not to if you allow for the firms to allocate this in some ways to have some kind of a credit of these permissions to carbon permissions and so on. It is they can manage over time with how to allocate this on time, and they can sell it in these pilots to other firms or not. I don't know. You have some markets between the firms about these permissions.
You mean how to allocate these firms, these allowances to the firms?
Yes.
The best way is auction, but then in the initial stage of an ETS, usually the government will worry that if you auction all the allowances, the firm will find that the burden is too high, and they're reluctant to participate in the system. So usually, in the initial stage, not only in China but also in the EU, also in the US, and they freely allocated most of the allowances by different equations. And you can divide this type of method into two. The first one is grandfathering, which means that you allocate the allowances based on the historical emissions of the firm. Mm-hmm. And the second one is called benchmarking. So you allocate the allowances based on the best performance or average performance of this sector. So the performance means the emissions per output. Okay, so roughly two approaches. Yeah, for free allocation.
So in any of these cases, this trend of this cap that they have, they try to reduce it in some ways to see the reduction in the pollution, in the carbon emissions. Did you try?
Yeah, if you set a cap, so it means that the cap would be lower than the business as usual scenarios in your projection, and you will achieve some abatement.
And in the experiments they did it over time, and you saw some tendency about it.
I'm sorry.
Because I think that at least what I think is that the intention of these caps and to reduce these caps is to reduce the carbon pollution over time. And if you can do these mechanisms to stabilize the price, mm-hmm. you can allow the firms to continually reduce the carbon emissions at the same time. They can adapt to it in a more efficient way. So I would like to know if the experiments that they did, you find this kind of trend about this reduction.
Yes, very good question. I think in the practice, first for the government, many mechanisms, not only China, our cap is like decreasing. So you have a factor, decreasing factor to let the cap decrease every year. And then for the firm level, yes, and they would experiencing some, like green innovation, green inventions. And then, there's a kind of indulgence, change. And maybe the firm, they may get the reduction easier, and then you expect, you allocate the allowances based on the previous technology level, and then they have very high technology level, and they can achieve this target very easy. And I think this happened. Mm-hmm. But if you allow some flexibilities in the cap, and you can fixing it every year, fixing it all the time, and this would be better way. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Quite interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Banban. It was excellent. And now the next session, the next panel, Monica.
Thank you so much, Professor Banban, Professor Aline Magalhães, to moderate the panel. Thank you so much. So we are now going to our final section, our final panel. So I'd like to call Professor Lizia Figueiredo, who is going to moderate the panel. This is the demographics panel. Thank you, Lizia, for accepting to moderate this panel, please. And I want also to invite Professor Jinyang, who is going this is really, we are very excited about hearing about his research. So thank you so much. Professor Lizia, please.
Hello, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. I'm a bit confused. Good afternoon. I am a bit, I forgot the complete paper at the printer. So I'm a bit, my students know. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming to Brazil, all your colleagues and yourself. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Kenya, and everyone involved in this symposium to allow for this possibility. Professor Yang has his PhD at the United States, right? At Virginia Tech.
Yes.
And simultaneously, you have a master's degree in statistics, also in Virginia Tech.
Yes.
And then you went back to China,
Yes.
and it's now in Northwest, in the HUST University. Your bachelor's degree is
Yeah, my bachelor degree is in China.
in China.
Yeah.
And his interests are quite broad, but complementary. His interests goes from applied microeconomics, health, and labor,
Yeah.
and also international trade,
Yeah, some machine learning method.
and
methodology.
and also assessment or methodology assessment.
Yes.
And I understood, as a good microeconomist, you are always concerned about the impact of public policy on relative price, right? Either the relative price of agricultural production products due to international trade,
Yes.
either the impact of public policy in the allocation of time
Yeah.
among different household productions,
Yes.
either in how the household allocate the consumption decisions on time.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's relative price always.
Yeah.
And then it's not only that interests you. You are interested in well-being, right?
Yes.
In happiness. And a parallel line of investigation is about the impact of income on happiness.
Yes.
But I must stress also another paper that I found very important, which is the effects of the pension system
Yeah.
on,
Exactly.
on the health of the grandsons
In China.
in China.
Yes.
And just for curiosity, in Brazil, you have this sort of effect as well, especially in the Northeast. The public benefits are very important to help the surviving of of households in the northeast of Brazil. Okay, so another, and I think time, what I think unifies everything is time. And Professor Yang has an amazing set of photos about time. So I was quite thrilled to see the pictures that you have in your site. So I welcome Professor Yang, and I'm sure we'll have an amazing presentation about the Easterling paradox.
Thank you very much, Professor Lizia, for the fascinating introduction. I believe you have already have a overlook of my website already. So like those photos, yes, was taken all over my study in the US and at HUST. Thank you very much for the introduction. So today, my topic is about income, aspiration, adaptations, and happiness. It's a study in China. So before my my presentation, I want to ask you two questions. The first, that so how do you feel these days? Like, do you feel happy or not? So if you feel happy, just raise your hand. Okay. A lot of you is feeling happy. Then the second question is that if I ask you to think, seriously about your life, your whole life, everything taken consideration together. So do you think you are satisfied with your life? Yes or not? If you yes, raise your hand. Okay, we have a lot of people here, both happy and are satisfied with their life. That's great. But normally, when we do such kind of survey for the household or for the correspondents, they will give different answers. Some of them may say, "Okay, I'm happy today," but then you ask them to think carefully about their whole life, whether you are satisfied or not. They will give you a different answer. They will say, "Maybe not. I'm not satisfied." Right? So these are the two class of questions normally we will ask in the economics of subjective well-being. Like the first one is called the hedonic happiness. The second one is called the life satisfaction. It asks you to take all the things taking into account to think about your whole life. And also it includes other measures as well, such as like how satisfied are you with your income, with your health, etc. So this includes a bunch of measurements or a bunch of survey questions to measure the subjective well-being. We say that is the happiness. Okay. So in this area, there's a famous paradox that was proposed by Easterling in 1974. He says that, well, he examined a lot of developing countries, including United States, UK, and other OECD, some of the OECD countries and high-income countries, with a long time series, which means that from around 1950s to the latest time he could obtain. And he found that even though the income was increasingly steadily over this period, long period, people are not feeling happier at all. That's amazing, right? Because we normally think that income should have some impact, right, for our happiness. But he found nothing there. So that is called the Easterling paradox. So this graph is also showing the United States. If you look at the overall happiness data, it's keeping flat all the time. But when you look at the income over time, from 1970s to the 2000, which is the dashed line, it is increasing steadily, right? So it means that overall, people are not feeling happier, but their income are increasing. Then it comes to the question, does it make sense to earn more money? Right? Why do we want to earn more money? So then we come to another country, because to China. Why are we doing research on China? Because China is important because we were experiencing, and we are experiencing, a relatively very high-speed income growth or economic growth over the past decades, right? And then we want to ask the question that, given the very fast speed of economic growth, did we even observe an increase of happiness over time? If the people in China, if the Chinese people is not even feeling happier today than many decades ago, then how can we say that, this is a successful economic growth, right? So then there are some studies that look at the income change over time in China. The problem here, this is a study by Easterling, who proposed the paradox and then this picture is from Easterling 2012 on the peanuts. And he finds that, over time, actually, China's happiness is not growing from 1990s to early 2000s. That's also paradoxic, right? Because we were experiencing the fastest economic growth or income growth in the 1990s and early 20s, 2000, but no happiness change. And then for some of the surveys, like the World Value Survey is on the top of this graph, it's decreasing over time. And then it changed increased slightly, starting from the early 2000. But one potential issue of this study is that, the surveys included in the study are very fragmental, right? The longest survey is the World Value Survey, started in 1990 and stops in early 2000. But the other ones actually are fragmental. So it's not a consistent survey. So here's my study in 2023, it's this year. And I use a consistent survey to look at whether are we feeling happier these days, right? Comparing to many years ago, like 20 years ago. So this consistent survey starts from 2003 to 2021. And I find out that even though the happiness in general, or our average, is not increasing constantly, but it's increasing over time for the past 2 decades, 20 years. But it is still paradoxic because I don't have the data for the 1990s and 1980s, right? But at least I can tell that for the past 2 decades, we are feeling happier. And there are also other skeptics about the Easterling paradox. For example, Deaton. Deaton has wrote many papers like to confirm that actually the Easterling paradox does not exist. And he provided evidence of all the countries, like cross-country evidence, like saying, if we compare the countries in the world, like by the average income, and on this graph, the vertical axis is the average happiness. We find out that those countries with higher average income is feeling happier. Then he wants to use this figure to argue that the Easterling paradox doesn't exist at all. But Easterling himself, he says that, no, I'm using the time series data, but you are using the cross-sectional data. You cannot validate my paradox, right? So basically that's his argument. Then he reframed his paradox to be like, if we look at the time series data in a very long term, you will find out that income doesn't change our happiness at all. But if we look at the cross-sectional data, not only by individuals, like individual cross-sectional data or country level cross-sectional data, you will find that higher income countries or higher income individuals are feeling happier. That's the paradox that Easterling have reframed, but it's still a paradox. So then the pros of the paradox saying that if that is the case, means that raising the income of all in the long term, in general, does not increase the happiness of all, right? It means that not only yourself, but your neighborhood, all of income increase at the same level. It doesn't change your income at all, right? And the cons of the paradox saying that they find a positive link between average SWB and the GDP per capita across country, and also with a positive link with the economic growth within those countries. This is from the Stevenson and Wolfers in 2008 on the NBR working paper. But the pros of this study is that it's Easterling himself, and he said that no, it's not true because you are using a short time series. Those economic growth are within 5 years of economic growth. And he says that if you look at the long-term economic growth, then the gradient of happiness and income just go away. So there are other pros of this paradox. They say that it's actually not the income of yourself, but the income of the others, or we so-called the relative income. Right? So it's likely the rank of your income within your neighborhood or within the group you're comparing with. That matters. So it's the relative income and aspiration and adaptation that can explain the Easterling paradox. Right? It's not your income yourself. And the Kohn says that even you say, okay, it's relative income. So I should find the negative effects of the neighborhood income on happiness. But actually using the aggregate data of the neighborhood in the United States, Deaton doesn't find anything, that is negative about the neighborhood income in the United States. And also there are other, this is a lot of, ocean of literature. Like the other point is like about the satiation point, which says that income raises life satisfaction steadily, but no further on emotional or hedonic well-being beyond $75,000. My income is well below this level. So I still have the space to grow my happiness, right? But also there is studies say experience the well-being. It's the life satisfaction. It will raise it even beyond this level, income level. It means that you can just pursue your income. It's okay. You will be happier anyway, right? And here is Easterling's theory or explanation for his explanation for the paradox. He says that if in the first place, let's say if we are on the aspiration level A, right? And here on the vertical axis is our utility or happiness. On the horizontal axis is our income. Then if we want to, at this level, we think that if we increase our income, we will be much happier. We will move from point 2 to point 3. That's what we think currently. And he explains that when truly your income moved from 1M to 1,2, your aspiration will adjust as well. Well, from A1 to A2. Then you will actually move to point 5. And at this point, you have completely the same utility level or happiness level as previous. So it means that we are like, on the treadmill, on the rat, like a rat, walking or running on the treadmill. We run faster, and the treadmill is running faster as well. It makes us stand still, but our happiness never changed. This is his explanation. So now the question becomes, first, whether do aspirations adapt to both oneself and the environment, right? And second, so what if we consider about those adaptations? Should we have some happiness gain, right? If we increase the incomes of all, not only ourselves, but the neighborhood. And then why is some neighborhood income negative or positive in the literature on subjective well-being? The potential contribution of our study is that, firstly, we explore the adaptations of material aspirations with oneself and the neighborhood using a field experiment in China. And also, we differentiating the reference from neighborhood income. We show they capture actually differing effects in affecting their SWB or happiness. And we use a life cycle framework to explain the material aspirations. And lastly, we recover the effect of income or SWB after considering those adaptations. So here is our study. We consider, conducted our survey in likely 11 neighborhoods, or you can call it 11 villages. We call them nature villages in China. So we surveyed 2 administrative villages, which consists 11 nature villages or neighborhoods in China, in Fujian County, Shanxi Province. The thing is that why we choose the villages is because we can control for sorting into neighborhoods. That's very key when we think of the cases in other countries, like in the United States or in the Brazil. You have the right to migrate from one place to another, right? So if we measure the neighborhood income, we cannot control for the sorting effect of the individual who wants to move from one place to another just because that place have better income, better facility, and better education, etc., right? So when we're choosing the neighborhood in China, rural neighborhoods in China, it avoids that because you are not allowed to migrate freely from one village to another. That's the institution there, right? And then thirdly, the special case that both villages or all villages, they specialize in apple production, which controls for occupational effects. What I say is that maybe you just feel happier because you are a professor, you are you are president, you are doing some job that the social norms give you higher credits, right? But here we control for those occupational effects by just selecting those apple farms, right? So, and lastly, the design also rules out the social comparison in other dimensions because they are close in climate, in transportation, and culture, etc. They're close to each other. There are only 2 towns in Fujian County, and we pick 1 village from each town. So they are very similar. So another great thing we have done is that we investigate all the households within these villages. We are not doing a survey. We do with all the households. We're doing so in order to rule out some the selection bias. For example, if you want to do the survey, there is some participation bias. And also, there may be some, measurement bias if you want to measure the neighborhood income. If you survey all the household, then you want to rule out that sort of bias. So for both villages, like village A and village B, we have surveyed over 88 or 87% percentage of the total households, close to the all. So then we want to argue that we are taking advantage of a quasi-experiment in the 2 villages. That's because according to if you know about the China's rural reform in the 1980s, they have a rural reform that your farmland actually were collectively owned by the village. But the good thing is that in the 1980s, those farms were allocated to household and according to the population, household population. So it's almost like allocated evenly according to the population, which means that we can use the population around 1998 to predict, the farm, the apple farm areas that they own now today, right? So here is the fitted line between the 2, which is our defined area, which means that we calculate the area that they should own according to the population in 1998, and the vertical line is the area that they actually owned. So we find a very good fit of the data with a high statistical significance. And here we want to argue that our design can succeed because in rural China, land transfer is sort of restricted. Means that you are not very easy to transfer land, farmland, from one household or one household to the another. So we look at the data to see that, for those households who are operating the apple farms, so what percentage of them are actually owned by themselves and what percentage of them are rented by them from the other households. And we see that most of them have a majority of the apple farm area actually owned by themselves, right? So it just validates our predictions of using the quasi-experiment of the initial, market-oriented reform in the 1980s and 1990s. So here I will introduce how we measure their subjective well. We use life satisfaction, as I have introduced. And then we use income because most of them are focused mainly on Apple production. So we use the income from Apple to measure their income. We also control for the percentage of income sources from Apple sources. And then the advantage of our study is that we ask every household head to identify at most five households as their reference group. We ask them that whom do you normally compare your income with in Apple production? And then we calculate the average income of the group as the reference income, so that we can differentiate the reference income from the neighborhood income. And then we also measure the income aspiration or income design here, like in the future production, how much sales and how many quantities do you desire to have from each varieties of apples, regardless of your farm size or orchard size. We ask the questions on apples because we want people to think carefully about what they need or what they desire for, what their aspiration for. So we specifically ask the questions on their apple production. And then the neighborhood income is measured by the average household income of the neighborhood. So in total, we have 11 natural villages or neighborhoods and 605 households in the sample. Here I'm showing there are some variations in the data. Because when we look at village A and village B, even though they are very similar in a lot of aspects, they are different in their income because of the initial endowment are different. Because some of the villages, they are located in a great place. They can have more farm areas, but the other village, they have much smaller average farm size. So then their household income are different. One is around 60,000 yuan, Chinese yuan, per year, and the other is only around 40,000 yuan per year. So there's some sort of variation here. And good thing is that also interestingly, we have other three measures that compare with the household income. For example, when we look at the neighborhood income, we find that reference income is most of the time in both villages, they are greater than the neighborhood income. And income aspiration is even greater than the reference income. That's the interesting phenomenon we have found here. So we plot them into this graph, right? In both villages, the blue line is the log of the income, distribution of the log income. And the orange line is a distribution of the log of the reference income. We find in both villages, the reference income is greater than the neighborhood. People like to compare with households or people who are better than themselves. That's a very interesting phenomenon we have found here. And also, we find that the income desire is even greater than the reference income. Means that compared to whom you are compared with, you want income higher than them. That's another interesting fact we have found here. So here is the summary statistics of the households, background of the households and household heads in our sample. I want you to be noted that our sample is dominated by the males. It's simply because when you survey the household heads, most of them are the males in the rural areas. So it's dominated by the males and who are middle-aged, around with a mean age of around 47, and with low education. The education years on average is only 80 years. And also, but in terms of other backgrounds, like the household characteristics, most of them are very similar to each other. And then we plot some of their measures by their life cycle, like by the age groups. We find that for this graph, especially for their life satisfaction, they're sort of similar to each other. And we also plot the cross-sectional data. Look at within each neighborhood, we find a very positive link between income and happiness. So then we come to our core question. What if we raise the income of all? In the first regression, we just run the log neighborhood income on the life satisfaction or subjective well-being here. And the assumption here is that there's no externality outside the neighborhood. If that is true, then actually the log neighborhood income is capturing the the effects of income on subjective well-being, right? So, and we find a very significant result that, which is around 0.6 to 0.7, which means that if you doubling the income of all the household within the neighborhood, it will increase the happiness score or life satisfaction score by around 0.6 to 0.7, which is very large effect compared to the literature, which had like effect of around 0.5, and in the third column we decompose that effect into two. One is the individual income effect or household income effect. The other is the neighborhood income effect. As many studies have pointed out that the individual income effect is most of the time is positive. It makes you happier. But if you have living in a higher income neighborhood, you will have a negative effect because others' income has a negative externality. So here we find a negative effect, but it's not statistical significance. So then in the last column, we want to argue that in this study, we want to account for the aspiration, adaptation, and the reference behavior of the households. So we just add the other two income into the regression as well. And we find that actually the first two coefficients changes significantly from the previous three, right? Which means that this is the econometrician, one-on-one econometrician that if you add two variables into the regression and the coefficient change very significant, means that there is some correlation between the reference income, not only with the happiness, but also with the first two, right? So we want to say, okay, there are some adaptations or for the reference income with household income, the neighborhood income, and as well for the income desire or income aspiration with the household income or neighborhood income. So we want to look at how the household is adapt their aspiration and the reference with the neighborhood and themselves. So we run a simple regression of the log income aspiration on the log income and the log neighborhood income. And interestingly, we find that household actually only adjust their aspiration most prominently to themselves. So for those households with higher income, like 1% increasing in household income, they will increase their aspiration level by 0.4%. But there's some endogeneity problem here, right? So we take advantage of our design that the farmland were pre-allocated in 1980s and 1990s. We use the land of the household and the land of the average land of the neighborhood as instruments for the household income and the neighborhood income, and run the two-stage least square estimation again. And interestingly, amazingly, we find a result that is the household income is adapt almost perfectly. It's perfect, exactly perfectly with your own income, which means that if you have 100 more yuan or dollar for your income, your aspiration will increase by $100 as well. That is consistent with Easterling's prediction. He says that we will adjust perfectly, right? And another finding we want to point out is here for the reference behavior. How your reference behavior will adapt to yourself or to the environment. But here, interestingly, we find another story is that your reference income is mostly linked to the neighborhood instead of the household themselves. So which means that if you look at the two-stage least square result, so if the neighborhood income increases by 1 percentage, then your reference income will increase by over 0.9 percentage. Even though it has some correlation with household income as well, but the coefficient is much lower than the neighborhood. Okay, now we have the conclusion. First, your aspiration will adjust perfectly to yourself. Second, your reference behavior will adjust almost perfectly to the neighborhood. But interestingly, we have a paradox here. Why? Because even though the reference behavior adjusted perfectly with, almost perfect with neighborhood, they have different sign in determining happiness. One is positive, the other is negative. Interesting, right? And we also find another paradox is that we find, even though we find the perfect adaptation of the aspiration with the own income, their sign to determining happiness is also opposite, right? And how to explain that? Why? So we build a simple life cycle decision-making framework to explain that. I don't want to bear you with this model, but I want to explain the last equation here. So in equation 13, we have the decomposition of the total difference of the the utility change or the happiness. We find out that if we decompose it in the 4 components as we have shown before, the reason why the reference is positive is because actually who you compare most of the time are very similar to yourself. It reveals your life cycle consumption or life cycle income or permanent income. For example, I probably want to compare myself to my colleagues who are also highly educated, have higher income, right? I won't compare myself to the apple farmers, right? So then in that case, those neighborhoods or those reference group you compare with sort of reflects your life cycle consumption. That's why it has a positive effect on subjective well-being, right? And in that case, then the neighborhood income is negative because it captures the social comparison loss from others to others. And then we have the desire, which is negative here because it mostly captures one's, at least advantage of the initial endowment. For example, for a poor family, if one household head or one individual has a very high aspiration, it's likely because the household initial endowment or initial wealth is very low. He wants to have higher income in the future, very high aspiration, right? So that kind of sort of like ambition or aspiration have a negative effect for her, for her subjective well-being. And it's quite normal because normal that the income or permanent income positively determines subjective well-being, right? So if we decompose them into those 4, then it's naturally to write the equation we were estimating into the equation 14. And those alpha, beta, gamma, and kappa are actually the reduced form parameters we want to estimate, right? They are just the reduced form parameters. And what we want to do here is that we want to take into account of the reference income in equation 14. We want to write it as a function of not only the neighborhood but the household own income as well, right? And then we want to also write the income aspiration as a function of the household income and neighborhood income here. So we want to plug equation 15 and 16 into 14 to find out what is the overall impact of income on their happiness, right? So then the long-term effect, or what if we increase the income of all, means that we can have the alpha plus beta plus gamma times theta 1 times theta 2 and plus theta 2 and plus the last component. This is the sum of the 4 components in the 3 equations. That accounts for the long-term effects of the income for happiness. And if we assume that there's a perfect adaptation of reference income or income design, means that we are assuming that theta 1 plus theta 2, here, theta 1 plus theta 2 equals to 1. And also alpha 1 plus alpha 2 equals to 1. So then we want to do a little transformation of the equation 14. Here we just have 4 components, but here we want to compose into 4 that is more intuitive. First, we have the income of the household, captures the positive effects. Second, we have the neighborhood income, which captures the loss of the due to social comparison. And third term is that your extra reference income compared to the neighborhood, it reveals your advantage, right? In the maybe in the economy or the neighborhood. And lastly is the aspiration compared to your own income. If you have too much aspiration compared to your income, it means you're very ambitious, right? It has negative effects. So it's very intuitive. Then we copy the regression result in the column 1, and we do the transformation in column 2. And then what is the effect of raising the income of all? If we assume one does not change his optimism or change his ambition over time, then we can just sum up the first 2 coefficients to recover the long-term effect of income on happiness, right? So if we do that, we find that overall effect of income in the long term on happiness will be like 0.3 and the statistical insignificant, which means that if we assume there's a perfect adaptation, sadly, we won't observe a long-term effect of income on happiness. But in the last column, what we do is that we plug in we do not plug in this difference, but instead we plug in the residuals from those 2-stage least square estimates, as I have introduced, because they also account for the optimism and ambition as well. If we assume that this is capturing the effects, then the long-term effect of income is around 0.4 to 0.5, and is statistically significant at around 10% level. So it's sort of pessimistic and optimistic as well. And we want to use our framework to run the regressions for other measurements of their subjective well-being. We do this for health satisfaction. We find the framework does not fit the health satisfaction very well, which means that maybe the life satisfaction is more closely linked to one's utility, as previously presented in this morning by Jessica, also by some literature. And also we do this for financial satisfaction and find it does not predict the financial satisfaction very well. So then we ask a question.
Professor, we have to finish.
Okay.
Okay,
I have the last 2 slides. I will finish in like 2 minutes. Okay, then we come the last 2 slides. Then we say, okay, if we admit there's sort of long-term effect of income on happiness, but why we observe the long time series data that income does not increase the happiness of those countries, and we argue that those optimism and ambition, they may change over time. So in our previous model, we assume they are a constant over time, but they may change. What will affect those optimism and ambition? The most likely reason is inequality. Because during the past decades, not only income is changing, but also inequality is changing much. It's changing fastly and increasingly. So we run a regression of the inequality on the optimism. And we find actually it is increasing your optimism. Maybe you just feel you will be a rich guy in the future just because the others is rich now, very rich now, right? So the inequality sort of increases your optimism. But the sad story is that it increases even more for your ambition because you want to be rich. And then that's the problem, because ambition has a negative effect for the happiness, right? So in the long term, if we have a much larger increase in inequality, it will increase individuals' ambition so much so that they will not feel they are being happier, right? So that's the whole story here. I conclude. Thank you very much.
amazing work. Congratulations. Since I have more time to talk to Professor Yang, does anybody want to raise some questions? So just to begin the conversation, I am very interested in the determinants of per capita income difference among countries. Okay, so difference are something that I find interesting. But on the other hand, I'm also very curious about how people are homogeneous, how we kind of behave in the same way everywhere. Okay, my psychological approach is to my hypothesis and the evidence that I have covered have taught me that, well, as we expected, we are very similar. So, comparing our results with the previous literature, how much do you agree that individuals in China, in these villages, of course, they behave and they feel similarly to individuals in the West?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, I think, the culture are different. I cannot say that, the Chinese are exactly the same as the Brazilians or the United States residents or countries in other world, but there is sort of similarity here. What I can say is that what I found overall, the long-term effects is around 0.5 to 0.4, which is lower than what have been found in the literature. Mm-hmm. They have been, like Deaton, they have been estimated that the effect is around 0.6 or 0.5 to 0.7, yes, which is higher than what I have estimated here. Part of the reason, I think, is also because we accounted for those adaptation behaviors and the reference behaviors change over time. But they normally they do not. This sort of the part of the reason maybe is due to that, but also maybe part of due to the culture or any other dissimilarities between the countries. It can be like that.
That's similar, right? They are similar.
Yeah.
My reading was more. I think the similarities were more strong to me than the difference. I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think this is important as well. The other one concern, the idea of overconsumption in a maximization framework was a bit strange to me. Mm-hmm. Wasn't this is there? So, of course, because I am used to overconsumption when we compare, for example, the solo model with the Cass-Koopmans model of economic growth. But then exactly you are maximizing in the second situation. So, and then it's difficult to wonder if there is any omitted variable in your framework, because you cover almost. I'm very envy of your data. I envy your data, but anyway, one thing that concerned me was that your data is, as you talked previously, is a cross-section data.
Yes. And
this can have an impact on the estimated coefficients from which you draw your conclusions about the adaptation. So, are you concerned with?
Yes, that's a very good question. So we are sort of like look at the cross-sectional adaptation or cross-sectional correlation between the two, because we argue that the instrument we use can overcome those endogeneity problem. Then we argue that it may capture the adaptation. Okay. Those are required to use time series or panel data to find.
You don't need. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, your data is really, it's a very beautiful data. It's a very well designed for the students to have an example of a really well designed field work. Okay, not only the field work, but congratulations. So I was thinking, is there anything left? Okay, so I thought, if you are realizing, if you are, again, the individuals seem quite similar. Although I understood it better today, that they can have different wealth, right? Because of the size of the area.
Yes.
So there are some diversity in here. But anyway, they have same age, same education, same.
Yes.
But still, they show different status-seeking behavior, different levels of optimism. Otherwise, you would not have been able to fit a coefficient, to estimate a coefficient significant. Right? Some feeling that there is still something there that is different among the individuals. Yes. So I was thinking, wow, you are covering consumption, you are covering status comparison. I would argue that there may be an omitted variable due to different concerns about caring for the others, either for the members of their family, either for the others in the village.
Yes.
So, do you think now, based on cultural difference and your expertise with the local culture, I don't know if you are familiar with their local culture, do you think there could be some difference in this concern about the others, altruist behavior, either to the family or to the others, that could be included? And I would like very much to see other rounds of your field work, or maybe you already have some data that discuss their attitudes about others that could be included in the regression as well.
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. We do have some social attitudes. There are questions on their social attitudes about, the local environment, local culture, and about the society. Yeah, maybe we can include it in the future as the more, evidence to confirm our results, to test for the robustness.
As a robustness check,
yes,
exactly what
that's a very good point.
It's not, of course it's a robustness check, but it's also a broader view of the human being, right? Covering all these areas, because you covered almost all. And also the discussion about family ties.
Yes, exactly.
Family support and happiness.
Yes. I think the potential advantage for this study is that we only survey the household heads. We ignore the other household members. So maybe in the future, it would be even better to include all the household members, right? Not only the household heads.
Yes.
Yes, we do have the data for the household and we control that in the regression.
Yes. Everything is equal. Monica. Ceteris paribus is this. Oi, Campolino. Hello.
Okay. As far as I understood, your survey were made in small communities.
Say that again.
Your survey were made in small communities.
Yes, in the communities.
And do this apply for big cities?
Yes, that's a very good question. We do this study in order to control, because it's special. It's so special. It's different from the cities. In the cities, you are allowed to move everywhere. I can move from one neighborhood to another neighborhood as long as I can buy the house. I can buy the, I can afford the utilities, right? I can, send my children to the school, right? But this is special because, like, in these villages, they are not easily to migrate from one village to another because the land institution. Because if you want to migrate from one village to another, they have to allocate the land to you, farmland to you. But according to the household registration system in China, if you're registered in this village, you're not allowed easily to migrate to another and have another household registration type. So they won't allocate the farmland to you. So in the rural areas, it's very difficult to move from one area to another. And that is special. If you ask me whether this can be extended to the cities at the same, with the same, well, it deserves further, study. But what we want to stress here is that because of this speciality, we can have even a cleaner result on the income and control for the others. That's my argument here. Thank you.
I was wondering how this literature deals with extreme poverty trap of slums, and places like that. This literature talks about it.
Yes, that's a good question. What I currently covers is those about the relationship between income and other income and happiness. What I understand from the literature, there's also many other important factors, such as marriage. Most of the literature find that marriage worth a lot of income. It worth like $50,000 per year if you get a marriage. The happiness, if you compare the happiness data. And then employment is important. Yes. And then education. And then health status. These are all very important. Not only income, but also other factors are important. But according to what your question is asking about, the extreme poverty, to be honest, I have not seen, the literature to specifically address on this problem. But it will be a great question to explore, I think.
Cássio?
Jinyang, congratulations for your presentation. It was excellent.
Thank you.
I think you have a kind of work that you combine, where you combine different special things, like you collect your own data, you have strong economic models, and also theory, everything together. So congratulations, it's excellent.
Thank you.
I have a more, I would say, more mechanical question, or I would ask about a more mechanical explanation to what you're seeing on the long term. So my question is in a way related to the last question. So I'm not that familiar with the literature on happiness. So I ask you to help me. When we are looking at the long term, and we are using averages, so the average income, the average happiness. Of course, averages can change because of composition effects. So you mentioned education, you mentioned marriage. There is the age effect. You showed that happiness varies with age. So if the age structure is changing, it probably affects those average. And there is inequality. So, I mean, your story is very convincing, and I see how it fits with Easterling explanation. So great. But at the end, it's interesting that at the end you come up with this idea that income inequality is very important. Income inequality is something that certainly changed over time. So we have the income, you have the average income, but based on your first graph, we are not looking at the distribution of income. We are not looking at other variables that could change the distribution of income and the distribution of happiness. We're looking only at the averages. So my question to you is, has the literature look at, when looking at the long-term effects, has the literature looked, other authors, earlier authors, look at how this, the change in those variables could explain the levels, the fact that the levels did not change, median average levels did not change over time?
Yes, that's a very, very good question that I also want to stress in the literature as well, because that what the purpose of my last two regressions on those, the optimisms or on the ambitions in terms of the inequality, I want to argue that over time, not only the average matters, but the composition also matters, such as the inequality. And the inequality not only affects the composition of the happiness, but also may affect the average happiness. That maybe matters. But unfortunately, I have not seen a long-term study that uses the long-term inequality change over history to account for the determination for their happiness. That's also my argument that maybe it's very important if we take that into account, and we will see a different story about, the flat average happiness over time. I don't know if I answer your question.
There is a chance. I mean, since you showed us that inequality is important, but you don't have the data to build a time series of the effect or not, it's still there's a chance that we could see that flat curve moving if you could control for some variables, including mainly.
Yeah,
that's great. I mean, that's something that you could try in the future, and that could even make the story more interesting.
We have seen a lot of great data yesterday. If we have a long time span available for those data in Brazil, maybe we can do some research in this area to find out those contributions of inequality over a long history. That could be possible.
Demographers love composition effects.
Yes.
And usually they help a lot to understand things in long term.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also because that, happiness, as you have mentioned, happiness varies with age. And also, that means that the demographic change, the systematic demographic change, would also change the average happiness as well. That could be also possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to finish the symposium, and I would like to apologize to Monica because I was so engaged in your presentation that I lost, and with you, because I lost control of the... It was good because I lost control of the time for a good reason. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lizia, for your moderation of this panel. It was fantastic. I think that you have a research on this, so this was very interesting for us to see your comments. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jinyang, for this amazing presentation. Great job. Thank you so much. I want to read your paper. So I'd like to thank you, the audience that is still here with us. We are finishing our last panel of this great symposium. We are very happy because I think that we succeed in doing this day, the schedule of activities. We have 4 amazing presentations from our colleagues from HUST University. I'd like to thank you a lot for my colleagues that came here and were here with us, all from colleagues and students that were here with us. So now we have a coffee break. I would like to say that people from HUST University will be with us till Saturday. So if you want to have some more time with them, maybe we can arrange it. I don't know if we can, but they will be here for the celebration of the 10th Confucius anniversary. In our faculty, our activities are finishing tomorrow, but we are still connected with them. But so I would like to invite you. Now we have a coffee break, but after the coffee break, so the students are very welcome to stay with us, please, because we have a conversation, a talk, undergraduate and graduate students with them. I think that we can do both together, and then all students can come here to the auditorium after the coffee break, and then we open for the conversation. Okay? Is it okay for you? Okay. So thank you so much, my colleagues. Thank you, Kenya, for your support.